Peoples of the worldwide federated internet, what's good? All right, so I've been trying to think about how to attack this subject, what to say. How do I approach this? It's kind of hard to sum up all my thoughts the past couple weeks because I have so many things racing through my brain, and move up to my mic a little bit. So many things on my mind that I don't necessarily know how to break all of those things down in a concise manner and convey my thoughts in a way that they're running through my head. So when I watch my videos back, I listen and I'm like, man, that's not necessarily how I wanted that to come out. That's not necessarily the thought that I was trying to get across, or I was trying to get it across another way, because there's too much going on in my head. With that said, I hear a lot of people mention the Nuremberg Trials, however you pronounce that. If you're not familiar with it, these were the trials that went on after World War II, where a lot of the officers, henchmen, soldiers, people involved with the Nazi Party were held accountable for what they did. There were trials. Some people were sentenced to death. Some people were sentenced to life in prison. Some people were sentenced to different prison sentences. Some people were acquitted. From everything I read historically, it seemed like it was a fair process. Now, of course, the victors always tell the story of history. You get their side. You don't really get the opposing side, the side who lost. Needless to say, I think this information is fairly accurate. Of course, if you win, there's going to be some embellishment that goes without saying. And I say those things because I know there will be some who will argue, well, how do you know this is true? How do you know that's true? The bottom line is, at some point, you got to trust something, right? You got to trust something. Not all of the information is going to be 100% accurate, but I have to have some framework to go off. Anyway, the Nuremberg Trials. A lot of people bring this up, and a lot of people bring the Nuremberg Code up when it comes to things that are going on right now. While I don't think the Nuremberg Code, I think it applies, but I think we have a carefully crafted way to dismiss arguments by changing definitions in this day and age. And so I say that to say, I can definitely see how you can look at the Nuremberg Trials and the Nuremberg Code and say, well, that doesn't technically apply to what's going on right now. So I kind of wanted to get into a loose history of the Nuremberg Trial, Nuremberg Codes, and I'm going to read an article from this website called IMA Research. I've never heard of it. I was trying to find a more concise article on like the History Channel website and, things of that nature, and I couldn't really find anything concise. This was probably one of the better articles that it was concise and kind of condensed everything down. And so I'm going to read this article, and I also have the Nuremberg Code pulled up, and I want to bring up an interesting point. And of course, we know what this is dealing with, but I want to get into this. I want you to make up your own mind, but I think this is kind of interesting. So, the Nuremberg Code and its impact on clinical research. So I'm just going to read through the article. I'm scrolling down to see how long it goes. Yeah, I guess I'll read the whole thing. I try not to offer too much commentary, just read it, kind of give you a backdrop for what was happening during this time. The Nuremberg Code is one of the most influential documents in history of clinical research. Created more than 70 years ago following the notorious World War II experiments, this written document established 10 ethical principles for protecting human subjects. We'll take a close look at its origins, its guidelines, and its enduring impact. What is the Nuremberg Code? When World War II ended in 1945, the victorious Allied powers enacted the International Military Tribunal on November 19th, 1945. As part of the tribunal, a series of trials were held against major war criminals and Nazi sympathizers holding leadership positions in political, military, and economic areas. The first trial conducted under the Nuremberg Military Tribunals in 1947 became known as the Doctors' Trial, in which 23 physicians from the German Nazi Party were tried over crimes against humanity for the atrocious experiments they carried out on unwilling prisoners of war. Many of the grotesque medical experiments took place at the Auschwitz concentration camp, where Jewish prisoners were tattooed with dehumanizing numbers onto their arms, numbers that would later be used to identify their bodies after death. Here's what's funny. I know I said I wasn't going to offer much commentary, but I kind of got to say this. I'm from Brooklyn, born and raised. Growing up, when you got on a train or the bus, depending on where you were at in New York, you would see older people, like really older people, get on. And I remember seeing this. I can't remember if it was on the lady's arm or her neck, and it was some numbers, and I didn't know what it was. And she was a concentration camp survivor, and she had one of these identifying numbers on her. It's kind of surreal to think that I literally interacted and passed people on the streets growing up who survived this atrocity. That's something to think about. The Doctors' Trial is officially titled The United States of America versus Karl Brandt et al., and it was conducted at a palace of justice in Nuremberg, Bavaria, Germany. The trial was conducted here because this was one of the few largely undamaged buildings that remained intact from extensive Allied bombing during the war. It is also said to have been symbolically chosen because it was the ceremonial birthplace of the Nazi Party. Of the 23 defendants, 16 were found guilty, of which 7 received death sentences and 9 received prison sentences ranging from 10 years to life imprisonment. The other 7 defendants were acquitted. The verdict also resulted in the creation of the Nuremberg Code, a set of 10 ethical principles for human experimentation. And from what I was looking up, it was one American psychiatrist, 1 American judge, and 1 British physician, and I think the other British guy might have been a physician as well, who collaborated to come up with this Nuremberg Code. What are the Nuremberg Codes? Ethical guidelines for research. The Nuremberg Code aimed to protect human subjects from enduring the kind of cruelty and exploitation the prisoners endured at concentration camps. The 10 elements of the code are: voluntary consent is essential. The result of any experiment must be for the greater good of society. Human experiments should be, so number 1, voluntary consent is essential. For those who don't watch my podcasts, for those who listen, I'll read out the numbers. 2, The result of any experiment must be for the greater good of society. 3. Human experiments should be based on previous animal experimentation. 4. Experiments should be conducted by avoiding physical, mental suffering and injury. 5. No experiment should be conducted if it is believed to cause death, disability. 6. The risk should never exceed the benefits. 7. Adequate facilities should be used to protect subjects. 8. Experiments should be conducted only by qualified scientists. 9. Subjects should be able to end their participation at any time. 10. The scientists in charge must be prepared to terminate the experiment when injury, disability, or death is likely to occur. Let me see what else is in the significance of the Nuremberg Code. The Nuremberg Code is one of several foundational documents that influence the principle of good clinical practice. Good clinical practice is an attitude of excellence in research that provides standard of study design, implementation, conduct, and an analysis more than a single document. It is a compilation of many thoughts. It is a compilation of many thoughts. Let me repeat that again. It is a compilation of many thoughts, ideas, and lessons learned throughout the history of clinical research worldwide. Several other documents further expanded upon the principle outlined in the Nuremberg Code, including the Declaration of Helsinki, the Belmont Report, and the Common Rule. Although there has been updated guidance to good clinical practice to reflect new trends and technologies such as electronic signatures, this basic principle remained the same. The goal has always been and always will be to conduct ethical clinical trials and protect human subjects. So I read that. Now what I'm going to read to you is, I'm only going to read the first article of the Nuremberg Code. And I want you to listen to this. Okay, forgive me. I'm going to splice this in. I stopped my recording abruptly, trying to do something else, moving too fast. Okay, so I'm going to read to you the first part of the Nuremberg Code. I'm not going to read the entire thing because I just have some thoughts concerning this on this first article. The voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential. This means that the person involved should have legal capacity to give consent, should be so situated as to be able to exercise free power of choice without the intervention of any element of force, fraud, deceit, duress, overreaching, or other ulterior form of constraint or coercion, and should have sufficient knowledge and comprehension of the elements of the subject matter involved as to enable him to make an understanding and enlightened decision. This latter element requires that before the acceptance of an affirmative decision by the experimental subject, there should be made known to him the nature, duration, and purpose of the experiment, the method and means by which it is to be conducted, all inconveniences and hazards reasonably to be expected, the effects upon his health or person which may possibly come from his participation in the experiment, the duty and responsibility for ascertaining the quality of the consent rest upon each individual who initiates, directs, or engages in the experiment. It is a personal duty and responsibility which may not be delegated to another with impunity. I believe that what we have going on right now, this is my personally held belief, is a violation of this Nuremberg Code. Now, I don't lean on stuff like this because we have a U.S. Constitution, we have the Declaration of Independence. I have every resource I need with existing U.S. law. And when I say law, I'm talking about the supreme law of our land, the U.S. Constitution, with the backdrop of the Declaration of Independence, to say, you know what, I'm going to opt out of this treatment. What I think we have going on now, if I'm not mistaken, I could be completely off base with this. A lot of people have quoted this. I don't know where they've gotten this information from, so I can't quote this with 100% authority and accuracy. But what I've been told is that the clinical trials for each and every one of these bongbongs, that's what I'm going to call them, so I don't get one of those flags on this video. The clinical trials for each one of these bongbongs, I believe, is up in either 2022 or 2023. The Nuremberg Code was developed by the United States and Great Britain. Any other country that would have violated this in the past, this would have been brought up. This would have been heralded and thrown in front of the cameras. But right now, nobody's concerned about this. This Nuremberg Code doesn't even matter. According to this Nuremberg Code that we helped develop ourselves, the United States, what is going on right now? Again, I don't like leaning on this stuff because this is not my major argument. My major argument is what's going on right now violates the U.S. Constitution and violates our own Declaration of Independence. What this is doing, this is remove life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? Is what is part of our inalienable rights that I am born with, not given to me by government. So for the government to say, you cannot work, and that's essentially, let's not make any bones about it. Most companies, major companies, have more than 100 employees, and most people in the United States work for a major company, right? And even most small companies are gonna have, let's say the majority, as far as I know, small companies are gonna have probably more than 100 employees, which is probably why they came up with that number. So essentially what they're doing is, by coercion, they're telling you, you must take this thing or you cannot make a living. That is coercion. That violates the Nuremberg Code, Nuremberg Trial. And the reason I brought up the clinical trials is because I know one of the things that will be said is, oh, this is not an experiment. This is FDA approved. Look, this is an experiment. This is not me saying that the bong bong is bad or good. I don't know. What I'm saying is, for you to tell me I cannot make a living if I don't get this, you're violating one of my inalienable rights, the pursuit of happiness. Right? In the pursuit of happiness, I want to make as much capital as I can to provide for my families. It's not about just getting rich. It's about providing for my family. And for you to tell me you cannot provide for your family unless you take this bong bong, you're violating my inalienable rights. And if you don't recognize that, at a bare minimum, recognize the document that the U.S. in compilation with Great Britain came up with after World War II, the Nuremberg Code. You are trying to force me to do something by coercion, not by choice, by coercion. This is an insane violation of both the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution. And I am completely convinced and unmovable on this. Y'all know what it is. Stay frosty, people.